And welcome back, everyone, to Zanpakuto Creation Series. Today's Zanpakuto comes to us from greatest ever, Gamer Forever. I almost said greatest ever, but that's a different person. Gamer Forever, who asked the question, "What is L from Death Note's?" There we go, right a bit more in the center there. What is L from Death Note's Zanpakuto? Um, Now, eventually this was going to happen at some point where Zanpakuto that I've created, and I haven't gotten through all the Zanpakuto I've created so far, by the way. I started making Zanpakuto for characters before I was starting to get suggestions for characters, and then those superseded the amount I was able to write out. But it was going to get to the point where certain Zanpakuto were going to cross over a little bit in their abilities in terms of what they did. It was just going to be my job to put a different flair on it to identify the uniqueness of the person using it. And that's to be expected because, not all abilities are created unique. Many are, let alone equal, I should say. Because, you look at, let's just say, some fire Zanpakuto in Bleach. Obviously, you have your Ryujin Jaka, but Toba Yume is also a fire type Zanpakuto, mostly just fires out little fireballs, but it can be used to chain Kido as well. It has different capabilities compared to Ryujin Jaka. As far as we can tell, Ishin's Engetsu is also a fire type Zanpakuto, but it just works differently. And there's an anime character, the third captain of the captain of the third division, Amage. I think that might have been his name. That's how I remember that. That's how I see the name pronounced in my head. He had a fire type Zanpakuto too. It just, again, functioned differently. So you may see repeat abilities, but with just slightly different variations. Because after a while, it's going to get hard to continue to do this series and without having some spillover in terms of what a Zanpakuto does. Again, like I said, it's just going to be my job to make it unique. Now that I've gone on a 2-minute rant, let's get to this. Obviously, L from Death Note. He is the hyper-intelligent introvert detective who loves chocolate, who ultimately was able to solve the Kira case, but then had to give his life to do so. And then Kira went on to continue to just do what he was doing. So he ultimately didn't solve jack shit. But it's clear with a character like this, his type of Zanpakuto would be a Kido type. I don't think any of us would be in denial or, be against that concept. It would be a Kido type. I feel like we all can kind of agree on that. It would just probably be a standard katana. I do believe that would be the case. What would be the release of this, though? I want to say it would be something that would go towards his intelligence and ability to figure things out, as with the Zanpakuto's ability, because that is kind of who he is. He's a Sherlock Holmes type character. So for me, the release for this Zanpakuto would be See All, Know All. The name of it would be All Knowing, Knowing Eye, which would translate to Mio Shitorio, or Neo Shitorio. And then the Bonkai would be All Seeing Eye, which would be Subete o Mio Me. Now, that said, I wanted to be sure that I wasn't copying the name, because I feel honestly like I did that name before. But if I have, let me know. I was going through all the Zanpakuto I created and all the names I gave for them, and I couldn't find it, but I do feel like that I may have used that name already. Okay, so what I actually did, I know where it was, and it's with a character I haven't used yet. But I did use those words, I just didn't use that terminology. Now, because of the name and because of the character, I do believe the spirit would be something kind of like Minazuki, where it keeps itself like mostly wrapped up in a hood, but given its nature and name, the eyes are very present. They're glowing. Like you'll always see the glowing eyes. What this Zanpakuto's form, though, is that's a catch-22 here, because it all depends on what the ability is. What this Zanpakuto ultimately does is it kind of actually has a flash effect when it's released. And what it does in conjunction with L's intelligence and aptitude and analysis capabilities is basically form a countermeasure to whatever ability it's going up against. Now, granted, this ability would be limited by Ryatsu. Just because you have something that could beat something doesn't mean you would be. For instance, he goes up against Yamamoto. He goes up against Yamamoto. Yeah, his Zanpakuto's ability might be able to counter the effects of Ryujin Jika, but that doesn't mean he has the Ryatsu to compete with Yamamoto. He goes up against Kenpachi. He might be able to turn his Zanpakuto into a weapon that could go toe-to-toe with Nozarashi in theory, but if he doesn't have the Ryatsu to compete with Kenpachi, it doesn't matter. So, and L, I could see not being someone more akin to like a Rose or a Kensei, captain level opponents, but they don't display any hacks Ryatsu or anything like that. Unlike like Aizen, Kenpachi, Yamamoto, Ichibei, unlike those four guys, like who are huge monsters of Ryatsu pools. They're huge. I just realized the name I did, or the style I did. Huge. But no, he would it would be one of those things where he'd have to count. He'd be able to counter any ability he goes up against. But the catch-22 is that then he's stuck with that ability. You have to reseal his Zanpakuto. Wow, geez, my emphases are just all over the place. He'd have to reseal his Zanpakuto to be able to do it again. So his Shikai is very hit and miss against multiple opponents. Perfect example is if L were in the battle of Fake Karakura Town, and he went up against, say, the Trevistia, or let's say he went up against some of Baragon's Fracciones, that he could counteract, say, I'm just going to use three real quick off the top of my head that I remember. Findor was the one who went up against Hisaga, and he could fire out water, high-pressured water. Then you had, I can't remember the name of it. The guy turned into the bird who could fire feathers. You had that guy. And then you had Poe, who was the big giant one. So if he went up against all three of them, he'd only be able to form a countermeasure to one of them, and then either try to use that countermeasure, however effective or ineffective it may be, against the other two, or reseal his Zanpakuto and then activate it again. So it all depends on who he's going up against. For instance, if he went up against Baragon, and provided that he's capable, has enough Ryatsu, which as a captain class opponent in this case, he might very well have that level of power. If he went up against Baragon, formed a counter to his Respira, would the counter be able to do anything against any other opponent? Also, it should be noted that this kind of ability could be effective against like Aizen, but it's very subjective how capable it would be, especially if he's already under the illusion. It would be kind of one of those things that he'd have to see Aizen use it to begin for the first time, and then use his sword immediately afterwards. Otherwise, being under the illusion for so long, I think it ultimately phased out the counter. But that's Aizen too, so take that for what it's worth. But at the same time, anything's possible. But that leads us into what would the Bonkai be? Well, the Bonkai, I feel like, the Bonkai, as we all know, is basically the full realization of your Zanpakuto. And I think it would just be now his sword. First off, I think his sword does change form just generally at this point, and to something that is capable of handling the actual power of the sword. Maybe it's just a longer sword, and maybe the form adapts based on what it does now, because as a Bonkai, it now is capable of countering multiple opponents at once. That would be it. Now, there would be a limitation. There'd be no unlimited counterings of abilities, obviously. But seeing as a Bonkai is said to be 5 to 10 times powerful, I would imagine that the first time he releases the Bonkai, he could do it. He could negate up to 5, or negate. He could counter up to 5 different abilities with 5 different abilities. That sentence made sense. And as he trained and got stronger, his max output would be 10 abilities. Which, I mean, to be fair, there's very few times we've ever seen anyone go up against that many different opponents. Hell, there's very few times we've seen anyone go up against that many opponents, period. We saw that happen in the Substitute Soul Reaper arc, where Uryu did that stupid test, or stupid competition with Kurosaki. We've seen, we know in the Soul Society arc that they did that to a bunch of grunts. And you can make an argument you got close to that with the Stern Ritters later on, and a little bit in Fake Karakura Town. And we know Shinji did that in the in the Can't Fear Your Own World novel because that's how his Bonkai works. So hey, those situations do come up, but it's not like they're going to come up very often. More likely, he's going to probably be if he were to go up against multiple opponents, he's going to be copying like 2 to 3 at a time. But either way, I mean that is again my opinion on that. And the Bonkai would still be limited. I mean, if it's got a Bonkai, excuse me, if he's just going 1-to-1, his Bonkai actually is useless because like okay, I go Bonkai, great, I still only can copy or counter one ability. So yeah, his Ryatsu kind of ticks up too. That's kind of how Bankai's work. So he might think that to be an advantage, but depending on his opponent, it might just be useless. Um, it's in essence, it's kind of like Shinji's in that way too. It's also one of those things where he's got to be able to see the abilities. If he like gets backstabbed or something like that, it's not going to matter. He's either got to know the ability or see the ability before it. If he's going up against an opponent whose ability he just doesn't know, and who they're not showing off his ability, if they're not showing off their ability to him, like say he's going up against Sturmitter in the evasion, and they just do not show his Shrift like the whole time. He'd be fighting at a disadvantage because he just can't do anything until an ability is shown off. But that is just my opinion. This Bonkai, I think this sword would be very strong, but also have a lot of weaknesses to it. So, what do you think? Do you think this would be a good Zanpakuto for L? You think it's overpowered? Do you think it's just right? Let me know in the comments below. But until then, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you folks next time.